Jesse Tuggle had been around for all of this. He was born in Griffin, Georgia, about an hour's drive south of downtown Atlanta, and was about 3 months old the day the Falcons were founded. He grew up a huge Falcons fan, taking in the heroics of Claude Humphrey, Steve Bartkowski, and Alfred Jenkins, and was inspired to play football himself. True to how these stories often go, he was told he wasn't tall enough to go very far in football. Tuggle ended up attending Valdosta State with the simple intention of getting his bachelor's degree. On the side, he played linebacker for their Division II football program that had only been around a couple of years. He was too small, his school was too small, no NFL team ever bothered to scout him, and he went undrafted. Tuggle had to thread the needle to find his way into the NFL. During a chance encounter with then Falcons coach Marion Campbell, Valdosta State coach Mike Cavan insisted that this guy nobody had ever heard of was the real deal, begged him to give Tuggle a shot in training camp, and threw in a bonus. He lives just south of Atlanta, so you won't have to buy him a plane ticket. The Falcons ultimately gave Tuggle their very last roster spot, and what followed was one of the greatest careers an Atlanta Falcon has ever had. Despite his 5 Pro Bowl appearances, he was generally an unknown to fans outside Atlanta, but every last ball carrier in the NFL knew him and feared him. His tackles looked like car accidents. In this 1991 game against the Saints, running back Fred McAfee comes at Tuggle at a full gallop and stops as though he ran into a concrete wall. By all accounts, Tuggle is a very nice man, but you wouldn't know it from some of his greatest hits. Here in the late 80s, we see him manhandling the great Roger Craig with the impatience, embarrassment, and fury of a security guard taking down a streaker. These two men were about the same height and weight, but it was as though Tuggle had the ability to double his size at will. Tuggle destroyed beautiful works of art before they could be finished. Anyone who's watched Barry Sanders highlights knows this could be the beginning of something breathtaking. But in comes Tuggle like a local news reporter knocking over a nice sculpture. He immediately and completely throws the brakes on the most elusive player in history. There were just no easy answers for his level of determination. This determination came from what he felt was his mission. Jesse Tuggle was not a football player. He was an Atlanta Falcon. After first suiting up in '87, he'd experienced all those years of ceaseless losing. He'd seen the vanishing flickers of hope offered in the early '90s. Through it all, he stayed, refusing to entertain the idea of ever playing for another team. He wanted to go to the Super Bowl with these Falcons, no matter how impossible and distant that always seemed. Now, in his 10th year, that seemed more distant than ever. In 1996, everything else in Atlanta was on the up and up. The city hosted the Summer Olympic Games, which still 25 years down the road doesn't seem real. The Braves won their 4th National League pennant of the decade. The Hawks were a really fun team that actually found a way to give the legendary 72-10 Bulls a run for their money when they played them. In November, Atlanta's own Evander Holyfield TKO'd Mike Tyson to win the WBA heavyweight title. Culturally speaking, Atlanta was shifting the center of gravity just a little bit toward the south, with Outkast releasing AT-Aliens, a landmark album that stands as one of the most wildly innovative and influential artistic works of the 90s. The only real tie the Falcons had to any of this was in their great longtime offensive tackle, Bob Whitfield, who founded the studio in which the hit single from AT-Aliens was recorded. They called it Elevators. It was a track in which Andre and Big Boy sort of processed their rapid rise to fame, and the fact that they made it plural sticks with me. It wasn't the elevator. Not everybody rises up together. Sometimes your elevator is going the same way as ours, and sometimes it's not. Every other elevator in town was going up. In '96, the Falcons were going down. What else is new? Now, as always, they existed independent from everything around them. They were oblivious of and impervious to anything happening outside their hermetically sealed habitat. The Falcons dropped all of their first 8 games, but the wheels came off in week 4. In the third quarter, with the Falcons down 23-10 to the Eagles in the Georgia Dome, head coach June Jones finally gave the fans what they wanted. Surly starting quarterback Jeff George was out. Fan-favored Bobby Hebert was in. The crowd was enthusiastic to a degree that actually makes me feel kind of bad for George.
Styles, and here's Bobby Hebert, and the reaction of a few folks who are here.
They had the signs ready and everything. Minutes later, in front of a national television audience the Falcons rarely ever got, George and Jones were seen jawing at each other. This short clip was all anyone talked about the rest of the week, and it was the last time George would be seen in a Falcons uniform. Hebert threw 3 interceptions to finish out the game. That year, he led the NFL in picks despite not even playing in the first 2 games. Their listless offense, coupled with their NFL worst defense, resulted in a 3-13 record that got Jones fired. That sideline blow-up destroyed the team's morale. Tuggle, in particular, had an awful time with it. So much so that he almost left the team. And since he couldn't consider himself as anything other than a Falcon, that would have meant retiring, still at the peak of his abilities. The Atlanta Falcons had gone bust yet again. It was time to build what seemed at first like yet another sandcastle.
To try and figure a way out of the abyss, Atlanta sought someone who was philosophically 180 degrees different from Jones, leading them to hire Dan Reeves in 1997 as both head coach and personnel czar. The ink wasn't yet dry from Reeves signing on the dotted line before he chucked the run and shoot out the window in favor of a system that could win deep in the playoffs. The Falcons were desperate for a taste of Super Bowl success, and Reeves was someone who'd been there plenty. Of the 30 Super Bowls that had been played at the time Atlanta hired him, Reeves had participated in 8 of them from his time in Dallas and Denver. 20 years before finally coming back home to Georgia, Reeves, then on the Cowboys coaching staff, had actually wanted and interviewed for the open Falcons job, but when they couldn't agree to terms, Lehman Bennett got it instead. Remaining in Dallas, Reeves coordinated those Cowboy offenses that beat Bennett's Falcons to end each of their first 2 playoff runs. Now in complete charge of the team, Reeves had a ton of work to do to get ready for the '97 season, starting with welcoming the concept of tight ends and 2-back formations back to Atlanta's offense. While developing a strong defense and ground game was no longer an afterthought to the organization, Reeves acknowledged the importance of complementing that with a competent passing game. Only one problem. The Falcons employed 0 quarterbacks. Over in Houston, developments were transpiring that would make a starter available. The Oilers had gone 7-9 and 8-8 over the last 2 seasons with Chris Chandler under center. With such mediocrity unacceptable to coach Jeff Fisher and young quarterback Steve McNair ready to blossom, Chandler became expendable. Back in 1988, the University of Washington product was the first quarterback taken in the draft, though he struggled for his first several years, quickly becoming a journeyman who bounced around the league. Slowly but surely, however, by the end of the '96 season in Houston, Chandler had been showing signs of progress. Enough for Reeves to swoop in and send a couple picks to Houston for him, and to be immediately installed as his starting quarterback. The 1997 season was a year to lay the foundation, and growing pains were inevitable as they dropped each of their first 5 games of the season. But Chandler provided the kind of passing game Reeves was looking for moving forward. Low volume, but able to capitalize when the defense fears the run game. While 21 other quarterbacks threw more passes than he did, arguably no one but 49ers quarterback Steve Young was more efficient than Chris Chandler.
They finished the '97 season at 7-9, which is just about the best anyone had hoped for year 1 of Dan Reeves' long-term project of returning the Atlanta Falcons to respectability. That seemed like the goal, right? Reeves was the exact opposite of Jerry Glanville, a dignified statesman with a relatively conventional game plan who didn't seek attention and came back to his home state of Georgia for one last ride. Chris Chandler seemed to have realized his potential as a quarterback who was efficient, which is a compliment you give to your furnace. Jesse Tuggle would get to play out the rest of his Falcons career with a team he could feel good about. It was finally time for the Falcons to become a normal football team. Nobody raised an eyebrow when former AJC columnist Len Pasquarelli ranked them 18th and predicted they might squeak their way to 9-7 if every last thing broke their way. Seems reasonable, right? Nope, 14-2. A record so rare that to this day, nearly half the teams in the NFL have never done it. The Falcons had never done it before, and they have never done it since. At age 33, Jesse Tuggle played the best season of his career. Guys like him, safety Eugene Robinson, and ballhawk Ray Buchanan led a defense that forced more turnovers than any other squad in the NFL. On the fun side of the ball, Chandler had suddenly become a top-tier quarterback and benefited from 2 1,000-yard receivers in Tony Martin and Terrence Mathis. But the team's best player, the heart and soul and lead choreographer of these 1998 Falcons, was this man. Because I never had to try to tackle Jamal Anderson, what I most remember about him is that the dude was always smiling. He gave himself lots of reasons to. In '94, the Falcons selected the running back out of Utah all the way down in the 7th and final round. Anderson was surrounded by greatness since the very beginning. His father, James, had worked as a longtime bodyguard for Muhammad Ali, who was actually there in the waiting room when Jamal was born. Donna Summer would read him bedtime stories. Richard Pryor would let him come over and tear around his house in roller skates. Due to his dad's line of work, Anderson was constantly in the presence of royalty growing up, and if anyone suggested that he himself would not be royalty, he was always happy to politely correct him. During rookie orientation, when he realized he was number 4 on the running back depth chart, he simply took a marker and drew an arrow to put his name on top. While many notes from an editor are short-sighted and unnecessary, just ask Alex, this one was absolutely correct. In '98, Anderson rushed for 1,846 yards, something that to this day only 15 other players have ever done. It's more incredible when we consider this season came from a 7th rounder. No running back selected this late in any draft has had a season like this, or anything close to it. That season, including the playoffs, he was handed the ball a staggering 480 times, which still stands as an NFL record. In the regular season, just about half of all the Falcons' offensive plays involved either handing Anderson the ball or throwing it to him, and those yards did not come easy. Watch here as the first Patriots defender engages with Anderson at the 38-yard line. What follows feels like this decades-long boondoggle of a public works project. By the end of it, multiple governors are facing racketeering charges, and Anderson has carried half the New England Patriots to the 50-yard line. Anderson had terrific moves for a guy his size. Of course, we have to make note of the Dirty Bird, the end zone dance that came to define these Falcons. It emerged early in their 37-15 rout of the Rams in Week 9. Anderson had actually made up this dance during his time in Utah, but now it had a name, thanks to the fan who had spent the last couple years faithfully buying tickets to innumerable Falcons losses and hanging up a Dirty Bird sign he'd made. In a feel-good turn of events, this diehard Falcons fan was able to trademark the term and sell a few t-shirts after the dance's ensuing popularity. In an even more feel-good turn of events, the plucky upstarts at the NFL took on the big bad fan of theirs by deviously maneuvering to buy an already registered trademark from a Nebraska biker gang and sicking lawyers on him to halt his operation. None of that was Anderson's idea, of course, and besides, his best moves were seen on the green part of the grass. He delivered one of the best stiff arms a player's ever had, and on several occasions throughout his career, he threw 2 on the same play. There's Stephen Boyd, 250 pounds, much easier as Corey Raymond at 185 pounds. Here at 96, he completely shuts down 290-pound Hall of Famer John Randall and immediately hits the button again on Corey Fuller, 220 pounds. And skipping ahead to 2000 against the Panthers, he puts 1 on Rashard Anderson, then all the way down the field, he gives another stiff arm to, Eugene Robinson, more on him later. Anyway, the Panthers actually managed to knock the ball out, only to crash land in their own end zone and suffer a safety. Most of the time, you just could not win against Jamal Anderson. He was magic, and clearly, so was the Dirty Bird. The day he introduced it, the Falcons took the elevator from 5-2 all the way to 14-2. To this day, the best record in Falcons history. The playoffs lay ahead. But before we get there, let's stop to talk about one of their 2 losses, which came against the Jets in Week 8. This was arguably the most Falcons game of the season, in the sense that it was out of place, unexpected, and had absolutely nothing to do with anything else around it. Chandler had been knocked out of the previous game with a shoulder injury he was still nursing, so Dan Reeves turned around and gave the start to... oh no. In my second period class the next day, my friends were talking about how Steve DeBerg, the Steve DeBerg, had just played in an honest-to-God NFL football game in the year 1998. At first I didn't believe him. When you're a kid, the years feel a whole lot longer, and second grade seemed like eons ago. That was when I watched an already old, age 37 Steve DeBerg lead the Chiefs to the playoffs. He retired in 1993 at age 39, then immediately stepped into a time machine and traveled 5 years into the future, which explains why he showed up in the year 1998 insisting to everybody that he was still 39. Sure, Steve DeBerg was a 44-year-old liar who hadn't played football in 5 years, but all of that was zeroed out by the quality the Falcons treasure the very most. He was a guy they remembered from a long time ago. Reeves had coached him during his days in Denver, worked with him in New York, and thought he was really smart. Done deal. DeBerg was named the Falcons' backup quarterback, and when Chandler went down, DeBerg was shoved out there at 44 years, 279 days of age, becoming the oldest starting quarterback in NFL history to this day. His numbers were pretty bad, but they don't tell the whole story. Witness the heart of a champion in this clip, which we have selected entirely at random. Watch as he heroically remains upright. Okay, we should have picked a different clip, this one's on me. Before long, the Falcons found themselves losing 28-3. No one can come back from a score like that, least of all an aging quarterback. But this would be the last game the Falcons would lose for a long, long time.
Once Chandler returned the following week, the Falcons became the first team since the merger to win each of their final 9 regular season games by at least a touchdown. This was a squad entering the postseason red hot. Their 14 overall wins sprung them to a first-round bye and the first ever playoff game at the Georgia Dome in the divisional round against their NFC West rival San Francisco 49ers, with whom they split their 2 regular season matchups. Less than a month removed from undergoing quadruple bypass open heart surgery in mid-December, Reeves was back on the sideline for the Falcons. The very first postseason play in the building ends in utter disaster for the visitors. Garrison Hurst, the Niners' all-pro tailback, takes a handoff and bursts through a hole on the left side where his left foot gets firmly planted and stuck in the dome's artificial turf as his body gets violently twisted, shattering his ankle. From there, the Falcons smell blood. Their defense smothers the Niners for most of the first half, while Jamal Anderson carries the offense on his back with a short first-quarter touchdown run and a long second-quarter touchdown run that he caps with an acrobatic, soaring leap from the 4-yard line to give his squad a 14-0 lead. On San Francisco's ensuing drive, Atlanta should have upped that lead to 21 when defensive end Chuck Smith comes away with this backwards lateral live ball and takes it all the way back for an apparent touchdown, only for the officials to inexplicably hand the ball back to the Niners, claiming running back Terry Kirby secured possession and was down by contact before the ball popped free. That gift is a wake-up call for quarterback Steve Young and the Niner offense, who 2 plays later convert a 3rd and 23, which leads to Jerry Rice beating Ray Buchanan to cut the Falcon lead in half with just over a minute remaining till halftime. Chandler tries to quickly respond, but a tipped pass and pick sets San Francisco up in primo field position, where they tack on a field goal to shrink Atlanta's lead to just 4, when a 21-point margin seemed awfully likely only a few minutes earlier. In the third quarter, Atlanta's close to losing the lead when Young tries to force a pass into double coverage that Eugene Robinson graciously appreciates. After a couple field goals by their star 17-year vet place kicker Morton Anderson, the Falcons are in real strong shape late in regulation.
Here's an interesting question that has stumped NFL scouts for decades. Is it important to know what football is before playing football? The answer is no. Instead, you should be like Morton Anderson, who at age 17 was a foreign exchange student from Denmark who noted that his interest included football. Of course, he meant association football, aka soccer, but his host family thought he meant American football. When they took him to a game, he was bewildered. He'd never seen this sport before, and he had no idea what he was even looking at. But he wandered into his high school team's practice shortly thereafter, tried kicking the ball a few times, and was clearly really good at it. Anderson played roughly 7 million seasons. He played 6 of them for the Falcons, bounced around the NFL for a while, and returned to Atlanta to play some more at ages 46 and 47. By the time he announced his retirement on December 8, 2008, he was older than President-elect Barack Obama. And this guy, who had never even seen a football game until he was old enough to drive, went on to score the second most points of any player in NFL history. Okay, let's watch some more football, a sport that makes absolutely no sense.
The Niners are facing a third down, outside field goal range, down 2 scores with only a few minutes on the clock. But Atlanta allows a big play on a quick slant that sets up a Steve Young touchdown run, and they clearly didn't work hard enough during the week on defending emergency 2-point conversion attempts. Even though a field goal now beats them, the Falcons are still in great shape, with possession of the ball on third down, less than a minute left, and the 49ers out of timeouts. Just gotta keep the clock moving, milk another 40 seconds, and punt the ball away with something like 10 or 15 ticks left. Jamal Anderson did not get the memo. The Falcons are trying their best to blow this game, leaving enough time for about 6 or 7 plays for Young to engineer a miraculous game-winning field goal drive. But ultimately, a harmless Hail Mary runs out the clock as the Falcons have hung on to advance to their very first NFC Championship game in franchise history. As a 10-year-old kid whose entire world revolved around the Niners, falling just short after losing arguably their most valuable non-quarterback to a devastating injury on the game's very first play broke my heart into a billion tiny pieces, demolishing it far worse than any woman ever could. Anyway, the Falcons would quickly have to turn the page because on deck was a trip to Minnesota for a date with a 15-1 Vikings squad quarterbacked by Randall Cunningham, pretty clearly the NFL's top QB in '98. He was throwing passes to rookie Randy Moss, who tore the league up and happened to have a Hall of Famer still in his prime opposite him. And when defenses were terrified of that aerial attack, they could simply hand the ball to one of the game's best tailbacks, Robert Smith. Their offense did whatever they wanted all season, becoming the first team to ever score at least 24 points in every game. They were also the first team to ever top 550 points on the season, and no one in well over a decade had even come close. But to make them even more fun to play against, they also had a great defense. That meant a point differential of plus 260 when no one else was even at plus 200. Frankly, most years no one hits plus 200, and zooming out to everyone since the merger also reveals that Washington, by a single point in 1991, had been the only team with a better one. And since that 98 season, up through the 2020 conclusion of the 16-game era, only the 99 Rams and 07 Pats did so. It is unequivocal that the Vikes had just played one of the most dominant regular seasons ever. The Falcons stand just one win away from punching their ticket to Miami for a berth in Super Bowl 33. But even for a team that's had as wonderful a season as they have, this is a daunting task. But the 11-point underdogs get off to a perfect start, taking the opening kickoff right down the field where Chandler connects with Anderson for the early 7-0 lead. However, the most explosive offense the NFL had ever seen quickly strikes back thanks to Moss, the most explosive young receiver the NFL had ever seen, dominating early. First by drawing a 30-yard pass interference on Buchanan, before Cunningham finds Moss on a toe-tapping deep post to tie the game. Early in the second quarter, Atlanta's down 3 when Minnesota's safeties combined for a turnover with Orlando Thomas ripping the ball away from Falcons tight end O.J. Santiago and Robert Griffith scooping it up. The next play, Vikings offensive coordinator Brian Billick dials up a nifty little fake reverse screen pass to Moss that he turns into another big play. 4 straight runs get the ball down to Atlanta's 1-yard line, where Cunningham sneaks it in to put the Vikings up 10. With 68 seconds to play in the second quarter, Atlanta appears likely to go into halftime down 13 when a Chuck Smith strip sack is just what the doctor ordered to get the Falcons back in the game. They immediately capitalize with a Chandler touchdown pass to Terrence Mathis to pull him within 6 at the half. The only third quarter scoring is a Morton Anderson field goal that cuts the deficit to just 3. But another Cunningham scoring toss early in the fourth quarter pushes it back to 10. Facing a must-have 3rd and long on their next drive, Chandler uncorks a beautiful deep ball right into speedster Tony Martin's mitts to set up a field goal. And they later have the ball down 7, driving deep in Viking territory with a chance to tie the game when they go for it on 4th down, only to come up empty. The Vikings take the ball and move it all the way to the Falcons' 21, where the drive stalls, but who cares? Because there are only 2 minutes remaining, so the Vikings can all but clinch a trip to Miami with a successful field goal here. And they have Mr. Perfect to kick them there. Like the Falcons, the Vikings employ their own star 17-year veteran place kicker named Anderson, only theirs has just had the greatest kicking season in NFL history. In 1998, Gary Anderson attempted 35 field goals and hit every single one, not to mention all 59 of his extra point tries. Before then, not only had no one else who'd ever attempted even 20 field goals in a season gone without a miss, but no other kicker with at least 30 attempts had missed fewer than 3 in a season, so percentage-wise, no one had ever even come close to perfection. This is also only a 38-yard attempt, and it's in a dome. So yeah, the Falcons are dead meat as this foregone conclusion of a kick soars toward the uprights and veers about 6 inches wide left. The Falcons are back from the dead. Chandler then leads Atlanta downfield, but he bangs up his shin pretty good on a scramble. Though he stays in the game, his next pass gets deflected where Griffith nearly secures the pick that would have ended the Falcons season. Instead, the next play, Chandler rifles a bullet to Mathis, who hangs on through the tight coverage and hit from Griffith to tie the game. Perhaps spooked by the strip sack at the end of the first half, Vikings coach Dennis Green plays for overtime, meekly having Cunningham take a knee with 30 seconds still on the clock and 2 timeouts in his pocket. Atlanta loses the overtime coin toss and thus has to start the sudden death frame on defense. They quickly get off the field when a 3rd down pass to Moss is deflected by Lester Archambault and broken up by Buchanan. The Falcons ultimately punt it back, and again the Vikings call Moss's number on 3rd and long, this time way downfield, one-on-one with an apparent step on Robinson, who's in just good enough position to save the day on an underthrown ball and get the ball back to the Falcons offense. That was the 13th pass thrown to Moss in the game, and at this point it's worth noting what a monumental job Atlanta's defense has done since the second quarter. Remember that screen pass to Moss that helped set up Cunningham's touchdown? That was Cunningham's 6th pass to him, and those first 6 passes produced 5 completions for 71 yards and a touchdown. And that's not even including that 30-yard pass interference he drew. The ensuing 7 passes to Moss produced 1 completion for 4 yards. Facing a Vikings offense that scored nearly 3/5 of a point per minute throughout the regular season, the Falcons D has now held him to just 7 points, going back over 39 minutes of game time. They just need one more score from the offense to pull off one of the biggest upsets in NFL postseason history. They cross midfield on a pinpoint pass from Chandler to Santiago, and a few running plays works the ball down to, ironically, virtually the exact location where Gary Anderson missed his kick near the end of regulation. And now, after 33 long years,
Anderson is good. He knows it. They know it.
Morten Andersen has kicked the Atlanta Falcons into the 33rd Super Bowl.
This is tragic for the Vikings, who in 1998 are unquestionably one of the best teams ever assembled, and who, as of 2020, have never won a Super Bowl. But that's a story for another time. This is a miraculous ascent for Jesse Tuggle, who's been a Falcon either in spirit or in uniform his entire life, and has never once seen them get close to a Super Bowl. For Chris Chandler, a guy once typecast as a mediocre journeyman after a decade bouncing from losing team to losing team. For Jamal Anderson, suddenly a superstar after barely even being drafted in the first place. And for Dan Reeves, who'd come up empty in 3 chances to win a Super Bowl, and probably never imagined he'd get a 4th. A great Super Bowl narrative ought to have 2 things: intrigue and stupid bullshit. First off, the stupid bullshit. Upon the team's arrival in Miami, Coach Reeves has the idea of showing respect to the team's 10-year veterans and Pro Bowlers by allowing them to leave the plane first. So for instance, Terrence Mathis, the guy who barely missed the 10-year cutoff and didn't get a Pro Bowl invite despite leading the Falcons in receiving yards and playing a major part in resurrecting Chris Chandler's career? Sorry, stay put while all the hotshots go first. It's true that this is a dumb thing to care about because they have no connecting flights to catch and they're all going to the same hotel anyway, but it's also true that people are at their most cranky when they're trying to get off an airplane. And using this moment to establish some kind of weird class system seems like a particularly bad idea. On top of this, it's very hard for me to imagine that Reeves accounted for seat assignment when he schemed this up, and it's very easy for me to imagine a situation in which someone like Mathis has to get up, let someone like veteran Eugene Robinson get past him, and sit back down and stew in his discontent. And in fact, Mathis is pretty unhappy about the designation of more important and less important people. It's a dumb little thing, but it's understandable that he doesn't like the message it sends. Meanwhile, Robinson, one of the players who gets to disembark first, is very proud to be a special guy who gets to demonstrate leadership by showing everyone else how to walk off of an airplane. It's true that at this time, Robinson is one of the NFL's most respected nobles. He's a God-fearing man who holds a terrific reputation off the field for his charitable work, and in recognition he's been nominated for the Bart Starr Award. He's also a crucial leader for a Falcons team with very few players who have been anywhere near the Super Bowl. Robinson played in Super Bowls 31 and 32 for the Packers, making this his 3rd straight appearance. And he makes sure to warn his teammates against the pitfalls associated with it. No hard partying, no distractions of any kind, we're here to get things done. After Mathis expresses his disapproval over the airplane debacle, Robinson takes him to task, declaring that he won't tolerate such a pointless distraction at such a crucial moment. Folks, it's been brought to my attention that we have ourselves a goody two-shoes on board with us today, if you want to give him a round of applause when you see him. Thank you for your service, sir. Plain stuff blows over pretty quickly. The true intrigue lies, of course, in the Atlanta Falcons' quest for their first ever championship. But it also lies within an ancient feud between their coach and their opponent. During his 12 years with the Denver Broncos, Dan Reeves was the master of coaching teams that went to the Super Bowl and got their asses beat. In Super Bowl 21, they lost by 19 points. In Super Bowl 22, they got rinsed by a 32-point margin. And in Super Bowl 24, they were completely disassembled by the 49ers, 55-10. In what stands today as the worst defeat in Super Bowl history. Reeves just couldn't ever get his eventual Hall of Fame quarterback, John Elway, to the promised land. Elway stayed a Bronco after Reeves left. Well into his 30s, the Broncos were stuck in mediocrity, and it seemed like a done deal that he'd go in the books as yet another great athlete who never won a title. And here's where it gets good. Mike Shanahan was Reeves' former assistant in Denver. The two were on good terms for quite a while, but they soured on each other for reasons that are kinda tough to sort out entirely. While playing under Reeves, Elway began to feel a little stifled, and the two weren't getting along. At the same time, Shanahan, the offensive coordinator, got in good with Elway. It was also suspected that the Broncos owner saw Shanahan as Reeves' eventual successor. None of this sat well with Reeves, who used his authority to buck the owner and fire Shanahan. Although Reeves did try to smooth things over with Elway by letting him call the plays, there was no resolving anything after that. Though Elway claimed that he never forced the issue, the choice seemed clear. Either Reeves was going or he was. The Broncos sided with Elway. Reeves was fired, and wouldn't you know it, a couple years later they went and hired Shanahan as head coach. It wasn't long before Shanahan and Elway teamed up to win Super Bowl 32, and take home that championship Reeves was never able to get him. Reeves normally prefers to keep things quiet, but in the days leading up to the game, the media knows exactly how to push his buttons. After days of sensational framing and peppering Reeves with questions, the dam finally breaks. One writer describes the January 21st news conference as Reeves' personal catharsis. He didn't like Elway and Shanahan going on vacation together back in the day, he said. He suspected that Shanahan had fed Elway intel from the coaches' meetings, and that the two were cutting him out of the picture and drawing up players together on the side. And this is where Reeves explicitly lays it out. He fired Shanahan for insubordination. This is all against book. Coaches generally don't want to give the press anything. They leave it all in the past. But Reeves just keeps going. This saga from years and years ago still hurts him. It's something he'll never be able to let go of. He'd be willing to play golf with Elway and Shanahan, but wouldn't have dinner with them, which is the most cutting insult in a native Georgian's arsenal. Dan Reeves is fully on tilt. He spends the ensuing days trying to downplay the issue, but it's clear that no coach has ever wanted to win a Super Bowl more than this guy wants to win this one. Shanahan and Elway might have won one before he did, but a win here would let everyone know who was the boss, who was right all along. But the hell with all that, right? This is the Falcons story, not the Broncos. The Broncos, having won it all last year, are old news. The Falcons are ready to take this story right back, having risen from the ashes and pulled off one of the greatest upsets in recent memory. They've got a fierce defense led by guys like Ray Buchanan, who, because this game doesn't have enough sideshows, has spent days trading barbs with Broncos tight end Shannon Sharpe. Sharpe is one of the greatest shit-talkers in NFL history. Before a game against the Chiefs earlier this season, he found out the phone number of Kansas City linebacker Derek Thomas's girlfriend and spent the final drive of the game reciting it over and over, a tactic that proved so effective that the entire team spontaneously combusted on national television. Buchanan is trying to get out in front of this one, telling Sharpe that he looks like a horse and calling him Mr. Ed, and guaranteeing a win for the underdog Falcons. Between the trash talk, the bad blood, the dumb controversies, the dirty bird, and the head coach who really wasn't good at doing the dirty bird but was trying his best, this was shaping up to be one of the most intriguing Super Bowls ever played. Hey, Eugene? How you doing back there? Everything good? No. The man of faith? The good guy award winner? The fearless team leader who scolded his teammates against creating distractions? The very special airplane man? At 9 p.m. Saturday, Eugene Robinson is arrested and charged with soliciting sex from an undercover officer. He's later offered a diversion program that allows him to avoid entering a plea. He was looking for consensual sex between adults, and throwing people in jail for that doesn't help anybody, least of all sex workers, and this wouldn't be anyone else's business if Robinson himself hadn't spent God knows how long preaching against exactly this. And sometimes, as he himself will acknowledge from this point forward, there are some things you just cannot do. Robinson is quickly released from jail, but he's racked with guilt. He stays up the whole night crying, praying, and being consoled by teammates. He doesn't get a minute of sleep, but he insists to Reeves that he's good to go. And so the Falcons start a defensive back in the Super Bowl who, it would seem, hasn't slept in roughly 36 hours as of the opening kickoff. Well, there's that distraction we were warned about. All in all, it was truly a Super Bowl to remember.
Are we going to talk about the actual ball game? Personally, either way is cool with me.
Wait, the what? Oh shit, yes. Also, there was a football game.
This matchup, overflowing with all that deep-cutting personal bitterness, was also Reeves' 9th overall of the 33 Super Bowls. His run-first offense had a monumental challenge going up against a Broncos defensive front that had allowed an absurdly low 88 yards on the ground across their 4 games leading into Super Sunday combined. Nevertheless, Jamal Anderson and a timely 25-yard pass interference helped scratch out enough yardage to lead Atlanta down inside the Denver 10, where a 3rd down Bill Romanowski sack on a blitz up the gut holds them to 3. But powered by their legendary quarterback and MVP 2,000-yard tailback Terrell Davis, the Broncos work their way downfield where fullback Howard Griffith plunges in from a yard out for the score to take the 4-point lead. The next Falcons drive, Anderson comes up short on a 3rd and 1 and they have to punt, but they quickly get the ball back thanks to an Elway pass bouncing off Shannon Sharp's shoulder. However, those short yardage yips continue and torpedo that scoring opportunity when Anderson gets stuffed on 3rd and 1 and then 4th and 1. After a Broncos field goal makes the score 10-3, Atlanta again drives down inside Denver's 10, where a 3rd down incompletion brings on their future Hall of Fame kicker for a chip shot 26-yarder to not pull them closer. In the ensuing commercial break, a technical difficulty results in the broadcast resuming mid-play for a play the Broncos hadn't even installed in their game plan. They just drew it up on the sideline right before, like it was recess on the playground. Shanahan knows Robinson's vulnerable and has zero doubt that attacking him with a deep shot will expose him.
Oh, it's going to be wide open. It is going to be wide open.
Following a play fake, Elway bootlegs to his right, Rod Smith, given a free release by the corner playing an underneath zone, zooms by where he approaches a sleep-deprived Robinson who's caught completely flat-footed and turned around as Smith blows right past him on a post route for the crushing 80-yard touchdown and 14-point lead. If that didn't take the wind out of Atlanta's sails, a 4th foray inside Denver's 30 that still fails to yield a touchdown ought to do the trick. Another red zone field goal reduces their deficit to 11, but it also means that a quartet of very promising first half drives have combined to produce just 6 points. The Falcons are at least still able to lean on an outstanding field goal defense. After the unlikeliest of misses by Gary Anderson in their last game, the other Pro Bowl kicker that season was Denver's Jason Elam, and he pushes a couple third-quarter field goals wide. Perhaps that's the spark to pry the door open for Atlanta. They respond with their 5th drive of the game inside the Denver 30. As poorly as things have gone, if they can finally cap a possession with a touchdown here, they'll be down just 4 with over a quarter to play. That is when the big ol' left paw of Broncos defensive tackle Keith Traylor ruins everything. That sets up another Griffith 1-yard touchdown to push the Falcon deficit to 18 points. Next drive, what do you know? For the 6th time, they again cross Denver's 30, and still those 6 have produced just 6 points. When John Elway scores on a quarterback draw, that makes it a 25-point game. Since you can't come back from down 25 in the Super Bowl, the game can safely be called for Denver, with a couple of late garbage time Falcon touchdowns. Far too little, far too late.
I would be lying if I said I was a Falcons fan my whole life. No one is ever born and immediately wakes up a fan of a certain team. Building allegiance to a team comes through personal influence, whether through family, friends, media, or whatever. As a youngin', my allegiance was to winning. I was a bandwagon riding little shit, so if a team was winning, that was my team. So when the Falcons had their magical 98-99 Dirty Bird season, I was there hitting the move every Sunday as a 6-year-old. That was up until halftime of the 1999 Super Bowl. Looking for a quick laugh and attention from my family as the Falcons already looked finished, I sprinted to my room, took off my little Falcons t-shirt, and swapped it out for an orange shirt. I hustled back into my living room and greeted my family with a hefty "Go Broncos." That greeting was returned with death stares. No one was amused in the slightest. And looking back on it, I understand why no one was entertained by that trollish act, even coming from a 6-year-old. My family had been through all the misery of staying faithful to that team, and there I was, ready to destroy their hopes. It hurt them, and from there, I really understood what it meant to be loyal to a team.
Duane Tuggle, Jesse's wife, captured it perfectly months later. It had happened so quickly and unexpectedly that it just didn't quite seem real, like it was an out-of-body experience for her. With the benefit of decades of hindsight, it seems even less real. After a long stretch of irrelevance, the Falcons had spent all year riding this exhilarating ascent to the Super Bowl, but there was no building off this loss. No sustained momentum. Not even a period of gradual decline. Instead, the bottom dropped out immediately. It was as though they were retreating right back to where they belonged, like they couldn't get there fast enough. Though most of the key figures stuck around, like Dan Reeves and Chris Chandler, Jamal Anderson played through many injuries and sat on the sideline through many more, and eventually retired before his 30th birthday. This is perhaps the greatest testament to his contributions. This season would not have happened without his superhuman effort. In the 2 years preceding '98, the Falcons went 3-13 and 7-9. In the 2 years following, they went 5-11 and 4-12. In these 4 surrounding seasons, not counting the Super Bowl season itself, that's a winning percentage of .297. If we run this same math for every other Super Bowl team through 2018, we find that the vast majority sit way above 500, with most well upwards of 600. In other words, these other teams that went to the Super Bowl were good to great before that season and good to great after that season. Not so with the '98 Falcons, who are off in their own galaxy. Nothing before or after this season would suggest anything like this should have happened. It's like they were predestined for this season, no matter how little sense it made. This is, without question, and by a landslide, the most out-of-nowhere Super Bowl appearance in NFL history. The game itself was just as strange. It was like a close game nested in a blowout, nested in a close game. On the surface, the final score of 34-19 doesn't seem like that bad a loss, until you remember that 13 of those points came in garbage time. Dig a layer deeper though, and it's hard not to cringe. There was this enormous stretch lasting from the first quarter to the fourth, in which 5 of their 6 meaningful drives made it to the Broncos' 25-yard line. You should probably expect around 24 points out of that. You need to get like 17 at the bare minimum. The Falcons got 3. That's what lost it for them more than Eugene Robinson's performance, but because of how it happened, how avoidable it was, how easy it is to blame one person for all your problems, and how satisfying it is to catch a hypocrite, it's usually framed as though it's mainly his fault. For Robinson's part, he completely owned it. He understood and accepted that everyone thought he was full of shit, top to bottom, and then he moved on as a person who made a really bad mistake one time. Though it upset some of his teammates at the time, many, including Terrence Mathis, have forgiven him and even defended him. Whatever the reason, however you prefer to allocate blame, the fact remained that yet another generation of Falcons legends would go by the boards without ever winning a championship. After the 2000 season, Jesse Tuggle retired. In his 14 years here, he'd witnessed and written the wildest chapters in the Falcons' history to this point. At first, they called first ever draft pick Tommy Nobis Mr. Falcon, back when no one had any idea what the Falcons would become or how many spectacular personalities would come to define them. Just ahead, we're about to meet perhaps the most spectacularly gifted Atlanta Falcon who ever played, and a person America still struggles to fully process. But there's no doubt, Jesse Tuggle was, and is, the quintessential Atlanta Falcon.